I want to show you another example here about the relationship between scale and projections as it manifests here inside the ArcGIS platform. And in this case, I have the world data in here again, and I've put it into a Robinson projection, which is a compromise projection. Now, I'm over here in my data frame viewer, but I want to go down here. There's a little button down here which switches this to a map view, and so I'm going to click on it. I want to draw your attention to one of the things that ArcMap will let you do, again, that's very wrong. So one of the things that you can do in this layout mode is start to insert different important map elements, and one of those that's particularly relevant right here, if I go up to Insert, I can insert a scale, and I want to insert a scale bar for the purposes of our example here. And I just want one that's easy for you to read. So if I were to print this out at whatever size this particular piece of paper is that I chose, I have a scale here that this distance right here is 7,000 miles. Already, I hope that you realize that this scale can't possibly be true across this entire map that I would print out. Because, you know, if I were to go down here, we were talking about the South Pole, and obviously the South Pole is not more than 7,000 miles long. So this scale that I'm displaying here must only be accurate at some point on this map. And it just so happens that on this particular projection, this Robinson projection, this distance, or this scale is only accurate at the equator. The equator is that line of tangency for this particular projection, and ArcMap is going to use the line of tangency to calculate the scale. So that's when we ask it to put this scale on here. It puts the scale here, just like we ask, and it calculates it along the line of tangency, but it doesn't warn us at all that that scale is not accurate, you know, to make a measurement from over here, you know, to up there. We have to rely on our own geographic knowledge to know how best to use the scale and when it's not appropriate to use this scale. I'll tell you what, I'm going to put this down here so we can see it, and then I'm going to zoom in on this map. So let's zoom in over here into the Caribbean. Okay, now notice that the scale did change. Okay, if I go back, here I am at the world. The scale bar is the same size, and it's 7,000 miles. I'll go back to zooming in to the Caribbean, and now that same distance over here you can see is 1,560 miles. So this is still calculated along the equator, but of course as I've zoomed in, the scale of the map has changed. I'm going to do it one more time. I'll zoom in a little bit more. The scale bar has changed again. This distance is now 826 miles at the equator. And of course, at the moment, I'm not even showing any of the lines of latitude or longitude on here. And so unless you just know where you are, you really don't have a sense of where you are in relation to the equator. And moreover, this kind of looks like it could be right. You did see that the scale bar was changing as I was zooming in, so you might be thinking the computer is taking into account the scale and doing all these sophisticated things in order to make that scale accurate for whatever part of the world I'm zoomed in here to as I'm making my map. But again, that is just not true. ArcMap is not doing anything that sophisticated, and if you don't know that, then again, you can get things wrong. You can get things that look right, as far as, oh, it's a map and here's a scale, but the scale can be completely wrong. So let me prove that to you. I'm going to zoom in one more time, just for the sake of example. So I'm going to zoom in again. You see this is 826 miles. Now it's 600 miles. So it looks like it's updating. Now, this time I'm going to grab my hand, the pan tool, and I'm just going to slide downward. So remember, of course, the Earth is spherical. We've already been talking about how the scale should be changing as I go south, as I go toward the South Pole, toward that point. But let's check out what happens to the scale as I start to slide south. It stayed 600 miles. This distance says 600 miles. I'm going to slide south some more. Still showing 600 miles. Remember, it was changing as I was zooming in, but it's not changing as I go south. Here I am down here at the tip of South America. And hey, let's go down here. Now I'm down here in Antarctica. And the scale hasn't changed at all. It's still showing me that this distance is 600 miles. So sure, I could zoom in here. I could frame my map however I want. I can go up here to Insert Scale Bar, and it will drop the scale bar down. But that doesn't mean that it's doing it correctly. That scale bar is only being calculated at the equator, and obviously, I mean, it's obvious at this point that there's something up. But if you don't know that, you've never checked, you can get this disastrously wrong. Here again, we have to understand the theory behind it and how this particular software package is working. And in this case, of course, it's calculating the scale along the line of tangency. That's why it's important that the line of tangency be shown on your map, because that's where the scale is calculated. In fact, what we have to do is we have to specifically set up our projections to show the area that we are going to be mapping. And we'll take a look at that later. There are different ways that you can modify the projection inside ArcMap to be sure that it is centered on what you are trying to map, and also that the lines of tangency run through your map so the scale bar will be correctly calculated. It would be fantastic if the computer program did this in the background. You know, that as we slide the map around and as we scale it, that the computer would go through and automatically adjust the projection to show it correctly for whatever we are trying to show on the map at that particular time, and then also recalculate the scale for us and everything else. But it just doesn't. And this is another one of those experiments that I like to run. It's another one of those things that I like to test when I'm using different software packages to sort of understand what it's doing, and more importantly, what it's not doing, because that way you can catch so at least some obvious mistakes that might be made and that it will let you do wrong. But I hope by now you understand this relationship between scale and projection, and why what the computer is doing right here is wrong. So never just assume that when you do something, the computer is automatically going to give you something correct, because it may not. And these kinds of things can really, really matter.